Welcome to Marketplace Tech Bytes, our weekly review of some of the biggest stories making headlines across the industry. I'm Safo. This week, Apple revealed its upcoming operating system. We'll get into the good, the bad, and the glassy. The union representing video game actors has a tentative labor agreement with the companies that make those games. And we'll talk about personal computer pioneer Bill Atkinson, who died at the age of 74. I'm joined by a regular contributor, Anita Ramaswamy. She's a columnist for The Information. Welcome, Anita.
Hi, Nova. Great to be here.
Wonderful to have you. And as always, we're going to start with our Bite of the Week. And this is where we have our guest give us the number that tells us everything about the week in tech. And Anita, what is your number?
My number is 26. That's the name of the new iOS operating system that Apple announced, and they changed the naming convention. So now the numbers for the iOS systems are going to be named after years.
Yeah, so let's get into our first headline, and that is Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, where it made a number of announcements, and I'm not sure what it means if one of the biggest announcements is the name of our operating system changed. The conference is usually where we see a lot of the changes that are coming up for its gadgets in terms of the operating system, software upgrades, and we saw Apple announce some aesthetic changes. One of them, it's calling Liquid Glass. Let's take a look at a bit of that presentation.
Liquid glass. With the optical qualities of glass and a fluidity that only Apple can achieve, it transforms depending on your content or even your context and brings more clarity to navigation and controls.
Well, it looks kind of cool, but the reception has been relatively muted. Some user design folks online I saw were panning liquid glass. They're like, you can't see in certain cases what's on the screen. The stock went down 1.5% in the aftermath of the presentation. So, Anita, what does that tell us about kind of the general reception that Apple's conference got this year?
Look, the conference usually gets a lot of hype. It's a big deal. And I think this year, people were disappointed to see that there weren't more features Apple was announcing or planning to roll out anytime soon that have to do with AI. There were a number of cool features that they announced, but a lot of them were things that competitors already have that you can already get on Samsung phones, on Android. So, I think folks were just underwhelmed and they were kind of hoping for something more than just a design change. And like you said, a lot of people didn't like the design change because it's not the most user-friendly.
Yeah, so a lot there to unpack. Let's start with kind of the stuff that they did announce that reminded a lot of folks of Android phones. Can you walk us through some of the stuff, the highlights that stood out to you?
Yeah, so some of the features that they announced were, for example, live translation of messages, FaceTime calls, and phone calls. So you can see in real time as you're talking to someone what they're saying, which is cool, but
I feel like that's been around for a year now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's existed for a little while. That was one of the features. There was also this one was a little bit more significant and maybe related to AI, which is that they are going to allow third-party app developers to access AI models that run on the phones themselves. And why that's important is that basically an app, like, for example, AllTrails, which people use for hiking, you could theoretically, if the company allowed it, be able to go into that app and ask the AllTrails app questions about, for example, like, oh, I want to go on this hike with my 2 children and I want it to be X number of miles, that sort of thing. So it will, theoretically enable apps to be a little more usable when it comes to the AI features. But all of that is a little bit far out. And a lot of the significant changes are things like the live translation. There's another one, call screening, which allows you to filter out spam calls, basically by having a system ask a person, if it's an unknown caller, what they're calling about. And it records a little voice bite. So you, as the phone user, don't necessarily need to answer the phone if you're not satisfied with that answer.
Nice enough, but yeah, not really huge features. And I'm just curious, with AI, what's holding Apple back? I mean, if we can say it's holding it back, I think that's generally the consensus at this point. Apple's a bit behind on AI. What's holding it back?
So last year, Apple announced this big overhaul to Siri and said that it was going to be significantly improved with all these AI features integrated. And so far, that has just not happened. They were planning to release it, and they even showed a bunch of ads on TV last year that showed features that don't exist. There's been a lot of tension internally in terms of which team is working on what. and some fragmentation within the top ranks of executive leadership as to what teams are focused on what aspects of AI. So I think it really comes down to an internal organizational structure issue. And then, a lack of alignment on what the company's overall vision is. They seem to be really focused on, I'm sure plenty of resources were taken up by this liquid glass design update. But at the end of the day, that's just a design update and really doesn't have anything to do with AI. So they have been moving slow. They also don't have a cloud computing arm, which kind of means that they have to make partnerships with other companies in order to do that. Whereas if you look at Google, if you look at Amazon, they have direct access to cloud computing servers, which kind of helps them build AI faster.
And so there has been this distinction I've seen talked about quite a bit about on-device AI, which is what Apple is focused on, versus cloud-based AI. Explain that distinction and why that could be a hiccup for Apple.
So cloud-based AI is more powerful if you can run AI models in a data center. They are, put simply, more capable. The on-device AI models are smaller. They're a little bit easier to run, but Apple has always been more focused on the hardware. So they started building all these AI models, but they're just not as impressive and not able to handle as many tasks as the AI models that are larger that are coming from some of the other competitors.
Conversely, Apple says, our AI is more privacy friendly, right? Because everything's happening on the device as opposed to information going out and coming back in.
Yeah, that's right.
Overall, is it fair to say Apple is a bit out of ideas? I mean, we're not seeing any major kind of headline grabbing innovations coming from that company, and we haven't in a while, really.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of hype around Formula One and the marketing around that partnership in the video, which was really funny and pretty over the top. But, when it comes to actual features, Apple has really not delivered or even announced anything that would be groundbreaking. At this point, this year's WWDC felt like them just playing catch up to Samsung and Android. And, at the end of the day, like, they have not announced a bold vision that would really drive consumers to want to upgrade their phones. And there are a lot of companies, some of the chip makers, a lot of, hardware partners that provide materials and parts for Apple that will also probably suffer. And a lot of analyst projections that, Wall Street has right now for these different companies' growth is actually fundamentally based on the idea that plenty of consumers are, of course, they're going to want to upgrade their iPhones. Of course, they're going to want to upgrade their Apple devices. And unless Apple comes out with something really bold and compelling, that may not come to pass. We also have the overlay of tariffs, the potential that iPhones are going to cost more money. And it's just becoming a tougher sell for Apple to really pitch to the individual customer that, hey, you need a new phone.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see how it progresses and how these kind of software updates roll out in the fall. In the meantime, another story involving AI, this one in the video game sector, where the union representing video game actors reached a tentative deal with studios that make games. There's been a strike for a year now, actually, and it could be officially over relatively soon if the labor deal gets ratified by the union rank and file. And I should mention that SAG-AFTRA, the union involved, also represents folks here at Marketplace, a lot of the folks here at Marketplace, but we're in a different bargaining unit. So having said all that, what's this deal? Do we have any details of what's in it, Anita?
So the deal is not actually finalized. It's just a tentative agreement that would essentially bring an end to the strike. And it has to be approved still by the board, but it includes some terms and conditions about how AI can be used. And it protects essentially the video game, a lot of the voice actors and performers who contribute their creative talent to the video games.
I know that had been like the big sticking point that led to the strike. So let's talk about AI in video games and real life physical actors. How could their work, their voiceover, the motion capture work that they do, how is AI threatening that?
One possibility that a lot of actors and performers are concerned about is that if they contribute a little bit of their voice, then that voice clip could be used and the AI could generate something that sounds like them and talks like them, but isn't actually them speaking. So it sort of almost gets rid of the need to have a voice performer at all. And I think that's a huge concern for the industry.
And we're seeing the capabilities of AI to do things like this evolving dramatically. Just a couple of weeks ago or so, Google released its latest video generator called Veo 3. I'd like to play a clip that this is made actually by the AI video generator, and I want us to see what it looks like.
This ocean, it's a force, a wild, untamed might. And she commands your awe with every breaking light.
Now, that is completely made up. That's not a real person. That's not a real person's voice. That's not a real ocean. I mean, the whole thing is generated by artificial intelligence. And I mean, what do you think, Anita, when you saw that video?
It was super realistic.
Yeah.
I think these video generation tools are so advanced, and it's really amazing and incredible how quickly they've advanced, but it also raises some really important questions for creatives.
Yeah, and if you're looking, and that's video, like that's trying to look like a movie, but if you're trying to look like a video game, which I mean, they're very cinematic nowadays, video games, but there's a little bit more wiggle room there, right? So you could stand to reason that AI could be more threatening to a video game actor versus a film and TV actor right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other sort of interesting aspect of this is that video generation is a big part of the advertising industry too. And that's another area that employs a lot of creatives and could really be disrupted by the idea that it's so easy to go in and prompt an AI model to generate video for you. We're not entirely there yet, but Meta is one company that's really focused on, within the next year, they've announced plans to roll out a bunch of tools that will help advertisers essentially go in and create ads end to end without any creative input. I mean, you can just type in a bunch of keywords and you get an ad. That's the vision, at least.
All right. Well, yeah. So a lot more to come, I think, from the creative side of the industry, and the actors, the voice actors, the performers who are going to be looking at how to preserve their jobs, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let's move on to our next topic. We learned this week that legendary Apple Mac programmer Bill Atkinson died of pancreatic cancer. Atkinson is credited as the key programmer to come up with the graphical computer interface, the way we interact with computers. Basically, everybody interacts that way with computers now, and he came up with it during his time with Apple. And Anita, when you think back on Atkinson's legacy, what are the key inventions that we still use to this day?
There are so many, Nova. He had a really incredible legacy. But some of the key ones that I think of are, for example, Quick Draw, which is the technology that allows people to draw objects on the computer. Within the Quick Draw software, he was also able to come up with this shape, which was like a rectangle with rounded edges, inspired sort of by traffic signs and street signs. That is now, this motif and this graphic that we always see when we're using computers. And the one that I think is the most brilliant is like he came up with the most simple concept of a menu bar on the computer. And that was not something that we had seen before.
Yeah, everything that he was working on was about making a computer instinctual to use, right? Just like extremely simple and easy for any consumer to use.
Yeah. And that's kind of a funny contrast, just kind of going back to what we were talking about in our first topic today. When I think about liquid glass and I think about how that's been received, I think folks are rightly pointing out that it's not exactly the easiest interface to use. It's not the easiest thing to see. I mean, Apple thinks it's really cool. They called it a digital meta material that bends and shapes light. And that sounds very poetic in theory, but then when it comes to actually using it, at least to me, seems like it's fairly complicated. And I think, that stands in direct contrast in my mind to some of Atkinson's innovations, like something as simple as the menu bar, which allows people to go exactly where they need to go on the computer without thinking about it.
Yeah, and just the concept menu bar, you take it for granted because it is such a natural thing that you just don't even think about that's there. But they had to really plan out, where it was on the screen, didn't they? They had to plan out how it functioned, every little aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that in general, there's a need for companies to focus a little bit more on UI design, especially in this new era of AI and AI on devices. And, tech companies are really thinking through real time how to improve that process. And I was just thinking about how we heard the news very recently that OpenAI bought a startup that Johnny Ive, who used to run design at Apple, founded for $6.5 billion. And so now Johnny Ive and OpenAI are going to be working together on a bunch of AI devices, some AI hardware. And it just kind of highlights the need for Apple and for all these other companies to return back to their roots in terms of making these devices and making these technologies easier for the day-to-day consumer to actually use.
Which kind of shows how revolutionary what Atkinson did is and how difficult it is to do. This one man came up with this whole concept that we still use today. And right now, Johnny Ive, OpenAI, they are struggling and, working on, in tandem to try to figure out, okay, what's that next iteration look like for a consumer device that is instinctual to interact with, this time with AI being the central feature, right?
I wonder what is going to be the next menu bar that we all look back on and think, we interact with it every day, but hardly think about it.
Well, it's well put. We'll have to see. Hopefully it'll come out sometime soon. Maybe next year at the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference. But, maybe not. All right, that's Anita Ramaswamy, columnist for The Information. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Nova.
And thanks to all of you for joining us for Marketplace Tech Bytes Week in Review. Daniel Shim produced this episode, and I'm Nova Safo. We'll see you next time. This is APM.